A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
All right, hello everybody. We're joined here today with Karen Schrier. She's a game designer, producer, and educator, an associate professor and director of the Games and Emerging Media program at Marist College, where she researches games for learning, inclusion, and compassion. And just how awesome someone is researching games for compassion. She's the co-principal investigator on a Templeton Foundation grant on VR and empathy. She previously was a Belfer Fellow for the Center of Technology and Society at the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Prior to becoming a full-time academic, she worked at Scholastic, BrainPop, and Nickelodeon. Dr. Schrier is the author and editor of over 100 published works, including We the Gamers, How Games Teach Ethics and Civics, out on Oxford University Press, and what we're really going to focus on today, the Learning, Education, and Game series, and Knowledge Games. Kat Schrier, welcome to the show.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. Yay!
All right, so we're essentially here to talk about how games make us better people, right? And we're doing this in the context of usually when we do this show, we're talking about potential problems. And you're talking about the positive things that games can do. Can you give us a kind of general overview of what are the kind of positive things that games can do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that so many people are always focusing on the negative side of gaming. But just like every part of humanity, there's lots of possible cruelty in gaming, and then there's a lot of possible compassion and care in gaming. And so I do try to focus on the positives and to think about how we can better design and use games to support more of the positive behavior and try to limit the negative behavior. But there's always limitations, just like anything. So a couple ways that games can be used for connection. Well, it can support communication, it could support friendship, it can support empathy and compassion and care, whether you're caring about another player or about even an object in the game, right? Like the companion cube in Portal, right? Or it could be caring about an NPC or non-player character, someone who's not a real person, but is a character, just like a character in a book that you might care about. You could be caring about someone in a game. And then you could be also practicing all sorts of skills, like critical thinking skills, like decision-making, reflection, design thinking, right? Systems thinking. All of that is supported through games. Games are systems. Games are communities. And so when we are engaging with them, we are learning that system and we are understanding how all the different variables interact and how they work together dynamically. And so we're learning so much about our world and about each other through games.
I want to start with empathy because it's not often that people talk about games and empathy. And immediately got my attention. So can you go into some more detail about how can games help us develop empathy? We hear so much about the cruelty that happens with games and how especially the anonymity of games makes it easy not to be empathetic. So how can games give us the other side of the coin here?
Yeah, I mean, that's so funny because I feel like I'm always talking about games and empathy. So I'm it's like you forget that that's something that people don't realize, right? That, we can actually personally connect with a problem or another person's story through a game, just like we could through a book or a film or any other kind of experience, right? So when you are playing a game, you might be making meaningful choices and meaningful decisions that relate to, it could be a story, it could be inhabiting another perspective, it could be understanding another system and what it's like to be in that system or be in another moment in time. Being able to kind of step into another moment of time or to step into someone else's story helps us to understand it better. We get to make choices that matter, that affect that story. We get to perform what it was like to be in as that person and to understand the kinds of needs they have, their goals, what kinds of obstacles they've faced. All of those kinds of things are what games are really great at, right? They're great at giving us goals, at showing us obstacles and showing us how to possibly overcome them. Well, we can actually do that and perform and express either our stories or other people's stories through games. And also, I think there's something about the playfulness of games, the fact that they are a little bit silly, that help us to sometimes tackle difficult and serious topics, because we can maybe explore and experiment a little bit more than maybe we wouldn't in our normal everyday lives.
Right, right. Now, I remember reading some years ago now, some study, and I wish I could remember where I read this, but they were comparing the different kinds of media for how effective it was for teaching empathy. But they didn't talk about games, of course. They were talking about other forms of media. They were talking about television and movies and short stories and novels. And they were saying that, I remember the highlight of this was that of those, novels were the best for teaching empathy, for that longer term engagement with the characters. I think had a lot to do with it. And I wonder if has there been any sort of like comparable studies now with games and other sorts of media? Like, are games better at this because of the interactivity?
So I would say that that's maybe not the best question, right? Because I think that there's probably a lot of books that do maybe support empathy, but I could argue that maybe Mein Kampf probably does not support empathy, right? Right, as a book. Or there's a lot of film that might help you to understand what it's like to be in someone else's story, but then there's a lot of ones that have nothing to do with supporting that. So
Sure.
I would say, like, for a game, there's plenty of games that are trying to promote hate and cruelty, right? Just as there are games that are trying to support empathy and connection. So I would say, like, maybe a better question would be, like, what are those design principles? Like, what are the kinds of game mechanics that we might use to better support empathy? What are the ways that we can then use those games to, in the right context with the right audiences, to connect people, to help people to grow and to connect with other people? But I don't think that having a study that just compares like a medium overall would be very useful, because there's so much variation in every medium, and it's all about design, right? If you're designing a game to support empathy, it might fail, right? It might, but at least you're using certain kinds of designs to support whether it's a community that's more pro-social, whether it's a role-playing where you're taking on someone else's role, whether it's immersing someone in a first-person story. At least there's a direction there. Whereas I would want to research those questions. Like, is it that if you put someone in a first person perspective versus a third person perspective in a game, which of those perspectives supports empathy in a, and enhances it?
That said, right, obviously, every medium has its ways of connecting, right, with its audience. Since we are, it's funny, like, the minute you got into this, I was like, I just want to do the whole damn episode on empathy. Of course, we have other topics we want to talk about, but so what would be some of the ways, and I know that there are some games that are specifically designed, and maybe we could talk about a couple of those, right? Games that are specifically designed to create empathy. I was thinking particularly of a game about the trans experience. I was also thinking about a couple of particular experiences I had playing female characters, which has just been so rare in my experience. Unless I choose to create the character as a female. But can you talk about a couple of examples that you think are really good, thick examples of here's a game that's well designed to create empathy in the player?
Yes. So every game might have the potential to support empathy because you never know how it's going to connect with someone in some way. That said, there are many games that are designed for empathy, but there's one in particular that I find to be incredibly compelling. And that is a very small indie game called Way. And it's an online game where two players who are completely anonymous, they cannot speak to each other. They're randomly assigned to play together. And the only thing that they can do is they can gesture to each other with their avatar. And there's a couple emojis that they can use. No typing, no texting, no other kind of form of communication. They have to, however, play the game together, and they have to rely on each other to get through each of the levels. So, for example, in one half of the screen, one of the players can see where the steps are, but in the other half of the screen, the other player can only be the one who jumps on where the steps are. And they have to work together almost like symbiotically, because they each have only half of the information, and they have to keep teaching each other and learning from each other to be able to play the game. And so, for example, one of the characters has to kind of gesture and show where all the steps are so that the other player can jump onto those steps. And they're constantly relying on each other. The game is only 20-25 minutes long, but by the end of the game, both of the characters join into the same screen, and then they can finally write to each other. And what I've noticed when I've seen people play this game is that they become instant friends. They want to get to know each other. They build trust and intimacy with each other simply through playing together and relying on each other and really feeling responsible to each other to win that game together. It's completely collaborative, and it really is almost like a magical experience. In just 20 minutes, they've really formed trust. And I think that really gets at the heart of that empathy, right? They have to empathize with each other to understand what each other can see and what each other can't see. And they have to constantly be thinking about that when they're teaching each other. And I think there's something about that ability to be teaching each other and working together that I think really enhances empathy at least in this game called Way.
That sounds fantastic. Just Way is W-A-Y?
Yes, so it's W-A-Y. It's usually Way the game. I'm not sure, though, with everything happening with Flash, if it still is able to be played. I sure hope so, because it's a really incredible game. And it was made by students at Carnegie Mellon, right? This isn't, a game made by like a major AAA studio. This is made by a bunch of people who just really believed in creating a little game that really is powerful.
Right. I mean, these are classic trust building exercises, right? That you kind of, turn into a game and use the power of the game to make it as anonymous and as global as possible.
Yes.
And
that's amazing.
It's interesting because one of the things that it does with your trust building exercise, when you've got your typical trust building exercise where you have to communicate, you each get part of the puzzle, you need to communicate these things, you can still see the other person, right? You still make judgments about them. And here it's interesting how this is turning the anonymity into a positive. Yeah.
Journey does the same thing, but lesser so, right? Because in Journey, you can play it on your own, but it's online, so sometimes you'll meet other people, and you can't really communicate with them, and you have exactly the same avatar. So it's not like you can look at it. You can't tell anything about anybody. But you do get a little bonus for hanging around each other. You get, your magic comes back faster. You can sort of jump further. You can do a bunch of stuff when you just play together. But there's no way to communicate. It doesn't have the puzzles like Way has, I think, where you're not required to have somebody with you, but it's really nice when it happens.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're supporting cooperation, you're supporting friendliness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a friend making game. Like, I think about how powerful that is. And then what's really amazing about it, too, is that you don't have to speak the same language to be able to play together, right? So when I've played with people who are across the world and they don't necessarily speak English, right? And I'm able to play with them because of the game.
And
Yeah.
because you have somebody else to communicate with each time, the challenges are going to be different.
Yes, exactly. So you're always learning something new because you need to get to know that person that you're playing with and understand what their limitations are and what they need to understand to be able to play the game.
Yeah, that's amazing.
What about an example of a game that fosters empathy towards a particular group or a particular person or a particular experience? Is there a good example you can share for that?
Yeah, there's a really great example called Sweetheart, and that's spelled Sweet X Heart. And it's also another indie game that was just made by a few people, including Kat Small. And it's about the experience of being a young Black woman who is navigating work and school and the streets, to be interacting with different people and also handling and managing a lot of microaggressions as a Black woman. And it's a really compelling game because you are making meaningful choices for the avatar. You are trying to make ethical decisions, like, how should you respond to a microaggression, or how should you, handle different personal relationships. And as those kinds of relationships unfold, your stress level might go up. And it really kind of gives you a sense of those kinds of like little tiny things that might happen throughout your day, but they all kind of add up. And it's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts that are, it's just a lot. By the end, you see that even those little kinds of very problematic and biased interactions end up having a big impact on a person. And it helps you to understand even just what it's like to be a week in the life of someone else.
That's great.
Yeah,
Amazing. I'm going to definitely try both of these. I want to ask if there are, and I realize, we're not focused just on empathy here, but in terms of kind of giving this power of empathy, right? Are there any kind of general things that games can do well in mechanic wise, right? To do this, to make us more empathetic towards other people?
Yeah, so I created this set of design principles that I thought would almost serve as like a toolbox. You don't have to use all of them, but there's maybe like a few little tools that you could use that might support empathy. So things like role playing. You don't have to make a role playing game, but maybe having someone play as another role might be some way to support empathy. Or even something like having communication, right? So in way, you're maybe not communicating face to face and you're not communicating through words, but you are communicating through gesture and you're watching that other person. And that is a really powerful way of listening and being able to connect with someone. And if you want to, you can download that list of design principles. If you Google Designing Ourselves and my last name, Schrier, it's S as in star, C as in cat, H as in hat, RIER. And you will get a free white paper on identity, empathy, and bias. And in there, all of these principles are listed.
That's great. So in this, I was thinking also about code names. Code names as a game where you are having to communicate with your team through a very limited, like where the challenge itself is communication. Sounds like and just how great that is at building friends and creating friendships too, right? And it's such a good, like it's a physical game. It's a card game, a tabletop game. Yeah. That's really fascinating. Where just like the attempt to communicate with another person is sort of what's at the heart of this, right?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up a non-digital game because I definitely think that non-digital games are just as powerful. And can support
yeah.
empathy and connection and communication really well. With my students, I play this game that is completely like there's nothing, right? So I just have them rip up a few pieces of paper. I just say like, rip up a piece of paper from your notebook, fold it up and write an X or an O on it. And so then I make them all stand in lines. Obviously, this was before the pandemic. They all stand in like 3 different lines. And then I have them in the first round, I say, okay, I want you to try to be the row that gets all X's or all O's. And they have to like trade with each other. They can only trade with people next to them or in front of them or behind them. And so they do, like they all trade. And then someone goes, we all have X's, we all have O's. But then in the next round, I say, okay, so let's say the X round won. They got all X's. And then I say, okay, in this round, you can't end up with an X. X is really bad now. And you have to keep trading. It's like a hot potato. Like you got to keep getting rid of whatever's in your hand. And so then they play that round. And then I just say, stop. Oh, if you ended up with an X, you're the loser. So what we do is we compare what it feels like in those 2 rounds. In the first round, they're all working as a team. Like the whole row is like a team and we're like, X's are awesome. Yay, X's. And then in the second round, X's are like, we don't want to end up with the X. The X is bad. And everybody's like cheating. They're like trying to hide what's in their hand. They're trying to like get rid of it. Everybody's acting like totally individualistic, right? So it's like different kind of society. One being more of a communal society. They're trying to work together. And then the second round, more individualistic, where they're trying to be competitive with each other. And just a simple rule change, just a simple system change that entire culture, change the way that they played together. And so they start to realize how games and rule sets can really change the way that people play together. And also we talk about like pretend that X was a person or a group of people, right? If we suddenly are, how are we valuing different kinds of people? If we decided that we don't want to value a certain group of people, how might that change the way that we interact with them? Mm-hmm. And that starts to open up conversations about ethics, about communication, about how we communicate as a society and what the rules are that we have as a society. And so even again, just a little game where you just write on a piece of paper an X or an O can have a really powerful impact.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I want to take this. I want to take this as a good time to move from empathy, and empathy is so at the heart of understanding that we're all people. Understanding that other people deserve respect. Being responsible to other people, and move on to the sense of community. Right, because there's a difference, right, between feeling empathetic to other people and feeling like you're a part of something, right? So how can games help us? Now, in this case, it's interesting because we're thinking here in terms of members of society. Though, of course, normally we think about that as outside society, right? The real society. And of course, there's lots and lots of, game societies, virtual societies, professional societies. So societies overlap. But can you talk about, so let's start maybe with society or community as part of gaming community. And try to go up from there, maybe to also connection with non-gamers, I guess would be another way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main points that I make in my book, We the Gamers, is that, first of all, we are a we. We're all connected, whether we are gaming together or we're in school together or we're in a world together. We rely on each other and we need to make decisions in a way that we think about each other and as a part of our community, right? So whether it's deciding to wear a mask in public, whether it's deciding to follow the speed limit. I mean, these are all the kinds of decisions that we have to make nowadays almost every day. And they affect other people in our world. And the other really big point that I make in my book is that games are communities, right? They're not like a community. They're not, part of the community. They are communities. They're just like schools are communities, or our town is a community, or the whole world is a community, right? We're all part of that. And when we're playing a game, we're playing as part of a community, right? We might feel belongingness, or we might feel exclusion, right? We might feel like we are part of that world, or we might feel like maybe I don't really belong in this game. And that, like, those are all, and all the shades in between. And so in my book, I really try to talk about the ways that we can build community through games, how games are already showing how we're participating, whether it's being civically engaged through games, whether we're practicing the types of skills that we need to be part of a community, things like communication, reflection, problem solving. We all have to work together to be able to share perspectives and share information and evaluate information to solve the big problems that we're facing as a society. And so I think that games are not the only way to do that, but I think that they're a great way to do that, because we're already doing that in games. Like, we're already solving problems and being part of a community in a game.
Now, we know that there's lots of games where players do reach out to one another. They do create friendships. But you're talking about people, even within games where you never interact one-on-one with other players, that's still a community that you're still a part of, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, for example, in a game like Animal Crossing, you could participate in a way where you're going to other people's islands and you're engaging with a broader community, a real world community of people, and visiting their islands and seeing, picking their flowers or picking their trees, and going back to your island and continuing to design it and work on it. But you could also play Animal Crossing where you're just really doing a very individually focused gameplay, where maybe you're going to other islands, but they're always, NPC islands. They're not actually other people's.
Or you go into the dream thing and you go and they're not there, but you can look at their island. Right,
exactly. Or you can just focus on your own island and design your home and, plant flowers and catch critters, and you can totally focus on that. But I would say that you're still part of a community, even if you're doing it by yourself. And for example, so I play by myself. I did not visit anybody else's islands, but my daughter also played Animal Crossing, and we would show each other our games. We would talk about it. We would compare how we designed our homes. She designed her home to look like an aquarium because that's what she cared about. I designed my home to look like a library because obviously I really like books, because I know I like writing books. I love reading books. So we would talk about, like, this is what this means to us, and this is why we decided, she painted her house purple because she loves purple. I love green. So it was like we were comparing each other's worlds. And through that, we were building understanding of how we see the world and how we want to shape our world. And that is building community. That's being part of a community of people who are talking about playing. Me just talking right now about Animal Crossing is being part of that community and sharing what I designed with other people. That's part of a community. Going to a forum or talking about your game on social media, posting an image, all of that is being part of a community of players.
But these are kind of communities that, in some sense, you fall into simply by playing the game, right? Let's take the next step, right? How do games help you, or how can games help you be a better member of the community?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I would go back to practicing all of those really important skills that we might associate with ethical decision making, being a quote unquote citizen. Now, when I say citizen, I don't mean that you have to be like a citizen of a certain country, but almost like a citizen of the world, someone who wants to make a better world, wants to solve problems, wants to flourish, not just individually, but a society that flourishes. And I think games can support that. So for example, take a game like Among Us. Among Us is not a game that maybe you would think, oh yeah, that's going to make you a better person. Among Us is a game where you're competing with other people, trying to figure out who the imposter is. Some of it's collaborative because you're trying to work together to figure out who the imposters are in a group of people. Some of it's competitive because you might be the imposter and trying to actually get rid of all of those people. And so you might think, well, that doesn't sound like a very positive game at all. But on the other hand, it really supports a lot of communication. You have to use persuasion skills to make your case about who you think that imposter is. After each round, which is like someone gets killed, someone decides to call a meeting, you have an actual meeting. It's almost like being in a civic town hall where you have to decide, is there someone in our group who is, causing havoc? And who do we decide? How do we base those decisions? Is it, on some kind of evidence? Is it, it's almost like a jury working together trying to figure out, what the evidence is and how do we interpret that evidence? And so then you're making your case, you're making your argument about who should be, kicked off the island. And so then to me, those are the kinds of skills that make you a better citizen, right? Because you are engaging in dialogue, you're sharing evidence, you're persuading others of your arguments, and you're hopefully listening to those arguments as well.
Right. And the game supports all of that. And the game specifically asks for all of that. It gives you a venue for doing all of those things and then gives you goals for why you should do those sorts of things, right? And so,
yeah, exactly.
And so that's where, when we talk about game design, that's where the rubber hits the road. It's like, yeah, you can just create a forum for your game. But if your game doesn't actually ask you to do anything with the forum, then the game isn't doing much. Right?
Yeah, I mean, this game, Among Us, is requiring you to vote, right? You need to have an informed decision of who to vote for. You optimize your ability to win as a team if you have good communication among us, right? So the game is designed for persuasive, evidence-based communication. The more that you start to observe other people in the game and then be able to take that evidence back to those meetings, the better that you're going to be as a team. You're going to be a stronger team and you're going to have better communication with each other. So the game is definitely fostering those kinds of skills.
Okay, let's go now the next step, right? So the game happens to be fostering, let's say, those kind of skills, the skills of communication. And though it's interesting, right? Here we got communication, but not necessarily empathy. Right. So communication and critical thinking can lead into, many potential avenues. Let's say
I think that anytime that you're doing any sort of persuasive communicating, you are engaging your empathy.
To an extent, or at least, yeah, you need to understand. Though it's interesting in Among Us, I mean, how much do you need to try to understand where the person that you're talking to in very, very quickly, as you're just kind of deducting. I mean,
it's tiny little pieces, right?
Right.
I don't know. You really have to know your audience, right? You really have to understand them. Like, for example, I've played Among Us quite a few times with my students. And sometimes, I'll know that I have a little bit more gravitas or power because I'm the professor and I'm playing with my students. And I will purposely change the way that I behave based on thinking about what the students and even sometimes specific students, since I know who's playing with me, might respond. So there'll be two different almost personas I'll play. Either well, I'm the professor and I know I saw this and so you should listen to me. Or I'll play I don't really know what I'm doing because I'm a girl still. And where was I? I'm not sure. Was I in the cafeteria? I'm not sure. But really, I'm going around and killing everyone. So either way, I'm definitely playing a role and performing. And I think, anyone who's ever acted, I mean, that it is a performance, and you have to be really in tune with your audience to be able to perform in the way that you need to persuade others.
Okay. I'm still want to push us one more step forward towards non-game communities, or maybe towards game communities outside of the game. So let's maybe move to the next step, right? What can games? I mean, gamer communities sometimes have a reputation for being particularly toxic, right? What do games do, or what can games do, right, to create gaming communities that are themselves kind of thriving?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, right? So there was a recent ADL study, I think even just this past year, they looked at online multiplayer gamers, and they found that 81% of those players had experienced harassment, and some of them had, and actually quite a few had experienced severe harassment and toxicity. And, that's very rampant. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. There's a lot, just like any community, whether you're on the playground, in the locker room, some places in your town hall, because I know my town meetings get pretty toxic. It's there, human cruelty. But on the other hand, the same study found that 95% of game players had positive experiences, like finding friends or feeling belongingness and part of a community. So, games are complex communities, just like any other community. And we bring things to the game, and the game brings things to us. Game companies need to be mindful of how they're designing that community, right? Because we can design, maintain, and sustain a community so that it supports more pro-social connections, and that it, deters hate, it deters toxicity and harassment. There are game companies, I think there are, working together to share best practices. I know there's a group called the Fair Play Alliance that is working across game companies to help create frameworks and resources, so that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel, but that we're sharing the best practices for spurring compassion and care rather than cruelty.
Can I ask,
Sure.
so are communities where you have this kind of communication, like Among Us, right? Are they healthier communities? Because as part of the game, you do have some sort of are games that are collaborative or that encourage empathy or some way. Do they essentially end up creating healthier gaming communities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. It's a research question I've always wanted to kind of look at. Are there certain kinds of game mechanics that are used in a game that might promote a community around it that might be all more pro-social? For example, if you have a Animal Crossing type of game where it's maybe more collaborative, you have to rely on each other to some extent, or you're having more compassionate, connective kinds of relationships with NPCs, is that going to spur a more loving community than a more violent game like Halo or League of Legends? It's a question. I mean, it's a question that I've been wanting to research myself. Intuitively, you might say, yeah, well, of course, we're designers, we can design, we should be able to design a community that, if it's more, we think of the kinds of social structures that are more community-based and collaborative, that value collaboration and cooperation, of course, are going to be valuing more empathy and compassion too. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that fully. I think that that's something that we should be looking into.
Yeah, it's interesting that you sort of intuitively suggest that that it must be happening, but I feel like if it was, there would be it would be like the sauce, right? It would be the thing that everybody did.
Well,
I guess so. But I don't know if that.
And it would
I
get
don't think
applied
that's
to
everybody's
places like
goal. Like
Amazon
I
and Facebook and all these places would just apply these
think
things.
maybe, but like, here's the thing. There's a time and a place for cooperation and collaboration, and then there's a time and a place for competition and maybe experimenting with boundaries, right? So I think that I don't want to just say like we all have to be like super caring and Care Bear, love, compassionate communities. Like I think that we should be fully ourselves, and fully ourselves is flawed and has the range of from cruelty to compassion. I happen to focus on the compassion side, but I think there is a time and a place for the darker side, to be allowed to experiment and explore our shadow selves, and to be competitive with each other, and to fight and to be violent. I mean, I think that those are all part of the expression of humanity. And I think that that's okay. I don't want to.
Right. No,
I don't want to downplay it.
I totally agree with you on that, but that's not exactly what I was asking about. I was asking about whether, like, if we knew that there were these ways of making very positive social like groups with very positive social engagement, I feel like we would be doing that over on these spaces that don't have anything to do with games. So going back to what Shlomo was asking about, like applying these sort of rules to larger communities. Yeah, of course, I want to be able to play games where I can kill people, right? Because it's within the circle of the game, it's in the magic circle, it's safe
and fun.
But I don't necessarily then want to go and take that attitude into Facebook or into a social media sort of environment, right?
I need to piggyback on this. So this comparison between, let's say, the kind of community that you would have with Among Us, where you do have this kind of time for for discussion and cooperation, and games that would be like that versus games that are highly competitive, like League of Legends, and that you would expect to have these two communities be very different by the kind of dynamics that they set between the players. You're asking about, if you could take, a dynamic like that and export it out to the real world. So Facebook would have communities that would be like Among Us, in the sense that they would need to discuss and cooperate in some way. Because this is what games can do that's so hard for other things to do. Is that is that the right way to look at it, Kat? That this is one of the things we want to do is kind of look at what's unique about gaming compared to other mediums, right? That you do get kind of this potential for cooperation or discussion that is often hard to come by.
Yeah, so what I'm understanding that you're positing is that if we know so much about empathy and what kinds of experiences might lead to a more cooperative, compassionate community, whether it's in a game or not, why aren't we doing it at every company or at every level or every town? Why aren't we doing it? And my question is that what people want? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a cynical answer, but I would say I don't know if people want to always be cooperative with each other. And I think they do to some extent, but I think there's just as much of the opposite. And I think there's a tension there of wanting, we have a society that incentivizes individual achievement and competition over very limited resources. And it's, it's not, the goal is to amass as much wealth as you can and do it as quickly as possible and to do it without needing any help. That's what the goal of at least the United States is. I don't think every society is like that, but it certainly is, in my mind, the game of the United States is to make lots of money and not to necessarily support other people in doing that also. And so if the rules are and the to do it a certain way and the goal is this, that's what people are going to follow. Now, I would love for us to maybe make a different system that incentivizes other kinds of behavior. And certainly there are many communities that incentivize cooperation and care, whether you're in a family, right, or you're in a school system, perhaps there is a different goal, right? But I don't know. So I don't know if collectively we all want that, but maybe we should. And I think that games could help us redesign those systems, because it allows us to really see what those systems are all about.
That's a great point. Right. And this is definitely one of those things we can look at games and learn from.
Yeah, if I fully want to underline that. That's a great point and a great idea that playing games, this is where you start when you're talking earlier about systemic thinking, right? Games allow us to think about systems. And these systems you can then start to see these systems and other things outside of games too. And then start to think about, all right, well, how does this system work? How can we make it better? How can we make the system do what we want it to do? How can we make it create the sort of dynamics of the game that we want? I love that.
All right, I want to move us next step up, maybe final step up. Let's talk about what about positive impact that let's say playing games can have on our participation in civic society, right? So we're going all the way to we the gamers, as we the gamers being people living together with other people in the real world as well. In what ways do games, when they work well and make us better, cross into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're kind of leading there right now, right? So sort of like the next level up is if we're able to play together, to work through a game, to solve problems, to see our systems, to reveal what is maybe not so transparent in our society. We can see those flaws, we can see the problems, and maybe better solve them together. So in my previous book, Knowledge Games, I talk about how people actually are working together on real world problems through games. So for example, like the classic game is Fold It, right? Which is a game where real people are working together to understand the structure of proteins, things that we don't really know much about, and to solve that mystery, almost like a scientific mystery. Well, could we also do that with civic problems? Could we also work together to try to understand each other's perspectives, to try to solve the problem of reinventing, repairing, and restoring our civic systems? Right now, they are inequitable, they are problematic, they are biased. Could we work together to try to undo that, to rebuild them through a game, and to see how we could then repair our world in some way?
I want to say yes, and can we think of an example of, it's funny because this makes me think of our Andy and I, our next episode is actually a game that we thought up about criminal justice, where, we put you as a judge in terms of sentencing and get you to kind of think about some of the issues involved in sentencing, and hopefully some of the problems that we have as a society in the way we deal with criminal justice. And we're trying to, in there, also compare what you're saying to what other players or people are saying. But this vision is so much bigger. What you have in mind is so much bigger than that. Is anybody doing anything like that? I mean, the working together on protein sequencing, on unfolding proteins is easy, right? Working together on solving social problems where we dramatically and desperately disagree and connect that to our identity is obviously much harder.
Yeah, it's a tricky problem, right? They call it a wicked problem because it's so big and sticky. But I think actually that's where games kind of shine, because they are themselves kind of wicked and sticky and messy. But no one's doing this yet. I mean, people are doing pieces of it, right? So there's definitely some crowdsourcing apps where people are crowdsourcing solutions to civic problems and kind of soliciting advice from different people on how to, whether it's, you know, in a European country, like how do we change the bus system, you know, things like that. People are doing pieces of it. There's also this game that was not out, but it was like, you know, almost like an idea that was researched. It's called the Sudan Game. And what it was a bunch of people, players, working together to try to understand how they could solve peace in the Sudan. So what they did was they each kind of iterated through all the different needs of the different tribes in the Sudan to see if there was one iteration of steps that they could all take to get to peace. So let's say there were thousands of permutations of the needs of different tribes. Well, if each player could play through that iteration and see if it led to peace, we could figure out that, you know, what the possible configurations were, and then actually solve this big civic problem of trying to create peace among different tribes. Again, it's an idea that could lead to something, right? And I think that this is sort of like the next step for gaming, really thinking about maybe there's some parts of this in different games. Maybe people are starting to think about this, but is there a game that is really solving civic problems? Well, I hope so. Someone come join me and let's make it together.
Do you think that we're basically, as educators, as people who teach other gamers and teach young people how to think about games and think about systems in games, do you think that we are doing that just by like training more people to think about games as systems, thinking about systems?
Yeah,
because most people, I mean, a lot of people end up with a BA that they don't ever use in their life. You know, I mean, that's fairly common to, like, you know, for people to get a bachelor's degree and then go and find themselves in some other work.
Hey, the liberal arts program, you know, serves you in a very
right.
general
I can't
way,
wait.
Right?
I can't wait for people trained in game design to end up in policy.
Yeah, I mean, look, games are going to be something for each person, right? Some people might take from it that they learn about systems and that helps them to solve problems in their everyday lives. Maybe it makes them a better, you know, policy analyzer. I know that there are real policy makers who will play certain games. Like I know like the Wilson Center has some budget games that some people who, you know, work on budget policy will play to try to figure out, you know, work through some of their policy issues. People do that. I mean,
That's
people
awesome.
will work through real world issues through games. Absolutely. But those skills, you know, I always go back to the skills. If we could support the use and design of games to help us with all of those kinds of civic and ethic related skills, whether it's decision making, whether it's evaluating information, sourcing information. I mean, even just that, right? Even just thinking about information and building information literacy through games, right? That is going to make a more educated public, right? And then that's going to help in whether it's engaging in dialogue, helping to, you know, work on policies, work on problems, voting. I mean, all of those kinds of things that we need to be all engaged with. That could be, you know, people are already doing it through games, but, you know, I'd like to say that games could support that among other things, you know, among whether it's a field trip or a workshop or a book, you know, all of it's just another way to support those skills.
Right. To me, right, some of those are issues of motivation, right? Motivation to do something in games are obviously, you know, gamifying things is obviously great with motivation. Some of them are teaching skills like understanding statistics, God, how important is that these days, right? For the population to understand statistics and figure out efficient ways to do it. I think, the examples you mentioned are really interesting. But then you get to something like the game about Sudan, which I'm so fascinated by. And Andy, you and I have got to try to do something like this. I don't know. We got to come. We just got to give it a try. We probably won't succeed, but we just got to try to tackle it. But it's interesting because a part of it is just efficiency, right? How do you give different parties, many different parties, what they want, right? And that's that's a kind of a kind of classic problem about providing for desires. That's an efficiency issue, but it's never just about that. There's always more than that. There's always issues of identity. There's always issue of conflicting values. And that's where I want to go back to where Kat started us from with, if you do that, right, thinking about how will the process of the game, how can it also be used to generate empathy and cooperation, right, that you're going to need that to go beyond just the efficiency part, right? Yeah. To me, that's where things get really, really interesting.
One of the things that you mentioned about this idea of efficiency and the productiveness of games, definitely important. This idea that we might produce some kind of skill or produce some kind of results. But I think that the real beauty of games is that they allow us to express our full selves and to be messy and flawed and silly and weird. And it doesn't necessarily have to produce something, because just being able to express yourself, whether it's by playing a game or making a game, helps you to feel more connected to others as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, everything else is bonus as far as I'm concerned. Kat, can I ask you, I guess we have time for one more question. How do you think games have made you a better person? Or do you think games have made you a better person?
I don't really think of people as needing to be better or worse. I think it's more about being yourself and being able to express who you are. And I think that one way that games have helped me is just being able to be me, right? Being able to be playful and curious and engaged and nerdy and just being able to explore. And that's something that maybe I can't always do in my everyday life. Like, a lot of times we feel like we have to be a certain way. We have to perform. We have to play a role. In games, we could play the role that we want to play. We can decide how we want to explore our world. We can build it and design it in our way. And having that ability for me is really powerful. And so I don't know if it's maybe better or worse, but it's allowed me to be me.
That's interesting. Shlomo, I have this question is for you. Is there a name for this kind of ethics? The ethics of just being the person you want to be.
Ethics is about how to live a good life. And, all these things that Kat is talking about sound to me like really essential parts of living a good life, right? And listening to Kat, the first thing I want to do is I want to just go and play, right? I mean, this is, again, notice, right? Fun is good. And this isn't, this isn't just fun. This is expression, right? This is self-exploration, right? All that stuff is really good for developing, not that we need to go anywhere, but, developing and expressing who we are. That's just part of the good life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is amazing.
Thank you, Kat. I got to say that I love the project that you're working on. I hope we get a lot more from it, and it feels like this is the tip of the iceberg for where some of the stuff is going. All right. Play nice, everyone.